If you had hopes all would be quiet on the trade front for a while, those hopes were quashed with the American president now threatening 100% duties on Canadian goods. Let's go to Lawrence Herman on this, international trade lawyer and senior fellow at the CD Howe Institute. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Do you think Mark Carney's speech in Davos is what has changed Donald Trump's tune? He had already pulled back on CUSMA negotiations, of course, because of that Ontario out as well. Does Ottawa need to do some reach out here?
I don't think what the Prime Minister said at Davos was the reason why Trump has threatened 100% tariffs. I think we're dealing with someone who is undisciplined and erratic and would use any excuse to threaten Canada, as he has done recently. I don't think it was the Davos speech itself that stimulated this latest eruption by Mr. Trump. All of this shows, Morella, that the next while is going to be uncertain, unstable, and there will be serious elements of risk involved in the Canada-U.S. trading relationship. There's no question about that, in my view.
What is your take on the trade agreement between Beijing and Ottawa? Do you have any concerns about it?
Between China and Ottawa?
Yes.
I don't have any concerns about it. We're talking about 49,000 vehicles in a multi-million dollar, almost multi-million dollar Canadian market. And these EVs will not have, I don't think, a major impact. At the end of the day, it'll be the Canadian consumer that will have to determine whether those products should be purchased. And so the market will have an impact. It's not just the volume of EVs at a low duty rate. It's whether the Canadian consumer wants to buy these EVs, and that'll depend upon dealerships and the efficiency of aftermarket service. So there's a lot of factors that enter the picture, and it's not just 49,000 EVs that I think will be disruptive. And indeed, if they are, I might add, we have ordinary trade laws that can be used to remedy any injury that these EVs might cause if they're unfairly traded, i.e. subsidized.
Okay, so as you know, the Americans have raised concern about Chinese goods being dumped in Canada to cross the border into the U.S. One of their concerns, of course, would be about cars because they have a 100% markup, of course, on Chinese EVs. Are their concerns legitimate?
It's hard to imagine, given the size of the American auto market, that 49,000 EVs, even if a good portion of them somehow transited to the U.S. market, would have any impact whatsoever. No, I think what we've seen is Mr. Trump using his aggressive tactics, his enormous size and power to threaten Canada for reasons that really are untenable. But what this illustrates is the factors that will come to play when we're trying to review, renegotiate the USMCA. It will not be an orderly process. I think we're going to be faced with some very stiff demands from the U.S. side, i.e. take it or leave it, and we'll have to deal with that. Mr. Carney has shown that Canada has other options. They're not complete options. In other words, the U.S. market will always be important to us, but they are options, and Canada has an independent trade policy and should use those options. I say full speed ahead for Mr. Carney.
That being said, could we face the same pushback on every deal sought to diversify trade?
Well, that's right. And as I said, we have to face the fact that the next months, indeed, the next years, as long as Mr. Trump is in office, will be very uncertain and unstable. I don't see how Canada could ever convince the United States to abandon its so-called national security options. In other words, Mr. Trump, as long as he is in office, is going to insist on the right to raise or lower tariffs depending upon what he sees as U.S. national security interests. It's going to be very difficult to discipline the Oval Office in this regard. This is a new world that we're involved in. The trading rules have been destabilized completely. It might be out the window. And so we're going to have to deal with these realities. I think Mr. Carney went very far in addressing these realities in Davos, to his credit.
With the Buy Canada movement and Canadians avoiding trips to the U.S., do you think that Washington is feeling any of this? Again, it's like the mouse, with the elephant. We're the mouse. But do you think that there's any pressure on Washington as a result of the move away from U.S. movement?
I think there is. It is, in a way, isolated in various constituencies. It's not across the board, but there are those areas of the U.S. economy, the U.S. industries that are impacted, seriously impacted by his tariff wars against Canada. And those various interests may have an impact on the whole review process of the USMCA. Canada and Canadian business have done a very good job of raising these points in the U.S. with their direct contacts. That is a very good strategy that we've been following. The embassy has been very active in this regard. And so hopefully those pressures, making it clear that the U.S. has a lot at stake itself in this trade war with Canada, will moderate the worst impulses of the president and his entourage.
Lawrence Herman, good to have you, sir. Thanks for joining us on the program today.
My pleasure.